It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our latest installment of our Massachusetts AI and Technology Center webinar series. My name is Niteesh Choudhry. I'm one of the co-directors of the center, along with Deepa Ganesan. I'm a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and internist at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Today, we are delighted to have Sara Czaja with us. So she has many accolades and a long and storied research career, but most recently at Cornell, where she's professor of gerontology and director of the Center on Aging and Behavioral Research. She has a career which has really been dedicated to the heart of what we're talking about today in both our topic, but also the focus of our research center, which is this intersection between the aging of the population and how technology sort of will help us with that. She leads the Center on Aging and Behavioral Research at Cornell, and is also is also the director of the Center on Research and Education for Aging and Technology Enhancement, CREATE, which focuses on the interface between older adults and technology systems. So we've asked Sara to speak for about 35 odd minutes or so. During that time, if you've got questions or comments, we'll be happy to receive them in the chat. But we'll take questions or address most of those at the end of that. And so hopefully we'll have lots of opportunity for conversation. So Sara, thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually thrilled to be doing this. I wish I was doing it in person, but here we are, and we live in Zoom world now. So I'm going to talk about technology and supporting older adults, and focus primarily on what we're doing at our Center on Aging and Behavioral Research. I'll also talk a little bit about CREATE, and I do want to recognize the National Institutes on Aging, who has been the primary funder of our work in this area. Oops, let me back up. So I'll begin by just being a little boring and talking about some of the issues associated with population aging, and talk about some of the ways that technology can support aging adults. And then I'll provide a brief overview of our research in several areas: informal caregiving, social isolation, health and well-being. I'll talk about CREATE 5. We were just refunded for the 5th cycle. CREATE is a PO1, which you'll hear. And then another center we have within our center, which is called Enhance. And I'll end by talking or just highlighting some of the challenges we think about in the aging and technology domain. So in terms of population aging, as you're aware, and this is just to provide a little context for where I'm going with this talk, there's an increase in the elderly population, but of particular importance and relevance, I think, is the oldest old, who require more long-term care and assistance. And if we just look at the graphs, and I know you've all seen those, these graphs before, the green line on the graph on the left shows the increase in the population of 85 and older, and that line is not flattening out, though there's been some change because of the pandemic. And I think also what's highly significant is the other figure, which shows the increase in people age 90 and over. And this too is going to continue throughout the next decades. So what are some of the implications of population aging? Well, in our center, we like to also think about opportunities. How can we harness the increase of number of people? How can we harness the resources of people over the age of 65? And certainly one area is productive engagement. Many older people are continuing to work, want to work, or have to for insurance or financial reasons. And it might be in a part-time or full-time capacity, or it might even be starting a new work phase of their life. Many older adults are engaged in volunteering. I think that the next bullet is something we overlook a lot in terms of older people, is they have a lot to offer in terms of expertise and skill. For example, mentoring. Older adults do a lot of caregiving and provide family supports. I was just at a caregiving lecture, conference in Pittsburgh last week, and one thing they were talking about was grandparents serving as caregivers to to their grandchildren. And finally, something else I think that's important that we need to capitalize on is older adults really have a lot to offer in terms of maintaining culture and tradition. At the same time that the older population provides us with opportunities, certainly there are challenges that we're confronting with this aging population. One is living environments. Finding most people prefer to age in place, but many people cannot afford them, or housing structures are not designed to facilitate aging in place. Transportation and mobility is another big issue in many areas in the United States. I used to be in Miami. Miami is a car city. It has very poor public transportation as compared to where I am now in New York. Certainly, the aging population has put a strain on our pension systems, on our support systems. A big issue that's coming up is of the gap between the number of people who are going to be able to provide care to the large number of older people who are going to need care and support, and a strain in our healthcare system. We can see projections currently are that there will be an increase in the prevalence of people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And we know that family caregivers provide the majority of care to these older adults. And also there's an increase as one grows older, there's a greater propensity to having at least one or multiple chronic conditions. So how can technology help to meet these challenges? This is being talked about a lot, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. Certainly, it can facilitate use of technology, can facilitate access to healthcare. Telemedicine apps became very prevalent during the COVID pandemic. Communication and social connectivity can be enhanced. I'll show you some of our own research in this area. Broad access to information and resources. Also, there are opportunities for lifelong learning, for engaging in telework, so people can remain productive. There's a lot going on in terms of technology to help people perform everyday activities, not only with assistive devices, but there's much going on in the robotic space in this regard, in terms of domestic robots. And then there's opportunities for leisure and cognitive engagement. There's also technology applications to support family caregivers of older adults. And I've arranged them similarly in various care domains, if you will, on this slide. Again, we see telehealth, which allows not only virtual visits with providers, but also access to specialty care, which is important for some populations, for example, those who might live in a rural location. There are lots of informational websites for caregivers. The Alliance for Caregiving now has a YouTube channel, online support groups. There are care management technology apps, such as transportation apps or reminder and scheduling apps. And also there's a great deal of development now going on in the whole area of sensing and monitoring, home activity trackers, geo trackers. And then of course, there's virtual intervention programs where programs and services are brought to caregivers. And again, I'll show you an example of some of our research here using virtual platforms. So technology support. Okay, I've just given lots of examples about how technology can support aging adults and their family, but really the benefits we think of technology will only be realized if older adults have access to the needed technology, have requisite technology skills. Okay, it's more than just having access. It's can someone use technology in a meaningful way, and further, that they have adequate technology support. So what do we know about aging adults and technology? My group has worked for quite a while in this space, and we've published a lot on this. They generally are not, older adults are not technophobic. They perceive technology as valuable. They're willing to use it. They are much more likely to adopt technology if they understand the value and it contributes to their quality of life. Older adults are less likely to invest in a technology just for the sake of having the technology. We have found repeatedly that they can learn to use technologies. This is from the graph is from our PRISM trial, and you'll see this again later in the talk. And it's just showing PRISM was a software system that we developed and create. The control condition was a non-technology control, but these were older adults who lived alone at risk for isolation, and we measured their computer proficiency over the course of the trial. And what we saw was that people who used PRISM regularly continued to get much more proficient, and we had significant gains in their computer proficiency with use. But even though technology uptake is ticking up among older people, they are less comfortable and have less technology self-efficacy than younger people. And there still is an age-related digital divide. Technology adoption still tends to be lower among older age groups. And I think we saw this as a real problem in the during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when so many people were relying on technology to have access to goods and services, to medical services, telemedicine, and also to remain connected with family and friends. So I think the lag in technology uptake really has some serious implications for aging populations. And again, I want to stress that it's not just having the physical technology, it's also understanding how it can be used and how to use it. So of course, there are individual differences. Not all older adults are the same. I'm preaching to the choir here. The oldest old are significantly different from the youngest old, especially around the technology space, and they tend to adopt technology less. And individuals with a disability are less likely to own and use technologies. It's less technology ownership is associated, of course, with lower socioeconomic status and rural older adults. And again, this became very pronounced during the pandemic, often have less access, not only to the internet, but high-speed internet, which was required for a lot of tech applications. So let's now turn to, with that as background, our Center on Aging and Behavioral Research at Weill Cornell Medicine. And I'll talk a little bit about the goals of the center. We're focusing on developing and implementing strategies to address challenges confronting older adults and their family. And our focus is really on enhancing independence as well as quality of life. We also want to foster the development of students and junior scientists in behavioral intervention research. And of course, there's a focus in the aging and technology domain. We work a lot with the community. We really do have a lot of strong community ties. We have a community advisory board, and this is to help ensure that we have participatory research, that older adults and their families have a voice at the table. And then because of the nature of the work that we do, it's really team science, multidisciplinary work, which combines clinical, behavioral, as well as computer science and engineering. And as all of you know who do this type of work, this can be very challenging. So where are we housed? We're in the Department of Medicine, in the Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine, which has three main arms, if you will: a clinical arm, both inpatient, outpatient, as well as a research component, which we sit in the research component, and then there is a large education component. For example, we have geriatric fellows as well as a T32 program. So what's our current areas of focus? Family caregiving is one, cognitive engagement and decision-making, physical well-being. We're doing a project on financial exploitation. It's a NIA funded R01 that I'm collaborating with Scott Beach and colleagues at the University of Pittsburgh. We work in the area of social isolation, and we're just starting now to start working in the virtual reality space. So I'll just give you some examples of what we're doing. This is in the space of family caregiving, and this work has gone on for quite a while. It's really technology embedded in caregiver intervention research, where we're using technology to deliver interventions. And we started way back with Reach One, which was 100 years ago, it seems like. And now I'm going to talk to you about our latest program, the Care Partners Program. And the reason I have all these pictures up here is just to show you the dynamic nature of technology. When we did Reach One and Reach Two, we used what is now the antiquated screen phone, which we thought at that time was extremely innovative and unique. And now we're doing things with mobile devices like smartphones and iPads. So technology is extremely dynamic, and it's really hard to keep up with when you're doing this kind of research. So our Care Partners program, the Care Partners program is focused on evaluating both the efficacy as well as the feasibility of what we think is an innovative virtual dyadic intervention. And it includes a component for the caregiver. The caregiver component builds off of the the REACH program, an evidence-based cognitive training and daily support component for the individual with AD, and then there's an integrated component for the dyad. Our target population is white Caucasian, African American, and Hispanic caregivers and care recipients in the mild stages of Alzheimer's disease. We think this intervention is innovative on a number of ways. It's a dyadic intervention. Which is innovative, and I understand why not a lot of people do dyadic work. It's really challenging with respect to recruitment. You have to have both people meet criteria, both people agree to participate, and that can be hard. The intervention, the whole thing is delivered virtually. The focus, as I said, is on caregiver and patient in the early stages. Both components of the intervention represent non-pharmacological treatment approaches, the component not only for the caregiver, but for the care recipient, and we're evaluating it with diverse populations. So it is a randomized controlled trial. There is an attention control arm, and everybody in the trial gets technology. The caregiver component helps, what we're trying to do is help prepare the caregiver and help transitions across the caregiver role, prevent caregiver distress, and it is a multi-component intervention. The care recipient component has cognitive training and kind of compensatory strategies. We give people, I'll show you it in a moment, kind of an organizational tool to help them compensate for their changes in memory. And then there's an integrated component where the caregiver and care recipient work on things together. They work on communication. We have some stress management exercises, pleasant events that they can engage in together, and then things around well-being. This is what our home screen looks like. We used a user-centered design approach when we developed this intervention, so it was tested through usability trials. It's a pretty easy to use interface, and I will say that it is available in both English and Spanish. And this is what one of the pages look like. So it's a very integrated program. If the topic is stress management, this is a caregiver menu. The caregiver, they do this together. They'll have a session with one of our interventionists who will talk to them about stress management and the importance of stress management. Following that, they'll have homework where they'll have access to both skill building videos, which actually show them these stress management techniques. a learning series video, which kind of reinforces what was done in the intervention session. And then in the they'll have information and tips on stress management. So we do this with each component of the intervention, where we try and have not only intervention sessions, but also material to build on and maintain after those sessions. There's a community resource guide, a reading list, a discussion forum, and a calendar. And this is what I was alluding to earlier. It's a personalized organizational tool that we provide to the dyad. And I will say, we're thinking of now converting this to an app, because people really like this. They like having everything in one place. And a lot of our caregivers, we send them this notebook, and I can't tell you how many of them ask us for additional pages, because they really use it quite a bit. So it's a nice piece of the intervention. We're still doing follow-up data. We got delayed, of course, during the pandemic. We've randomized 176 dyads. I can't share any outcomes with you because we don't have them yet, but I thought I would give you some participant feedback. These are people who have completed the trial. And overall, the response has been very, very, very positive, as you can see from these quotes. People really like the program and really thought it, they learned things that were very useful to them, and it helped calm them down and gain knowledge, etc. In terms of social isolation and loneliness, this is another space that we're working in. And here, I probably you've heard about this, but this is part of CREATE. We designed a software system called Prism. That's Prism 1.0. That's what the homepage looked like. Those were the things you could do on Prism. You could access email, go on the internet. We had a classroom and calendar feature. People could share photos, play games. We had a community resource feature. Neil Sharness, my colleague, who's a fabulous photographer, took pictures. So every day they had a new picture, the date, time, weather. And we tested this out in a randomized clinical trial, a cross-site trial that was run when in Miami. I was still in Miami at the time, in Atlanta, because Wendy Rogers, a member of our CREATE team, was at Georgia Tech then, and also in Tallahassee, where Neil Sharness and Wally Boot are. And our goal in the trial was really to get information and how useful and usable the Prism system was. And we are very, concerned about interface design, of course. And our sample was older adults at risk for social isolation. These were folks who lived alone. They did not have computers or an email, very minimal, if any, experience with technology. They were not working, and they were not actively involved in community things like the senior center. So this was a very challenging population to recruit. Of course, we were interested in looking at the impact of Prism on social support, social isolation and well-being, and our secondary outcomes were around technology variables such as attitudes towards computer, tech adoption. People had this system in their home for a year, and we also gathered data on usage patterns and features. So we collected real-time data on the number of times people used Prism and which of the features they used within the Prism system. So this is our sample. I just want to, just give you a sense of who they were. Primarily female, which is not surprising. They ranged in age from 64 to 98 years. And I think over 30 or 35% of our sample was in the 80 plus age range. We had good, mostly lower SES status, and we had good diversity in the sample. So I was very pleased in terms of the sample that we tested Prism on. So our findings, which were published in and the gerontologist. One thing that was great, I thought, was that we were able to successfully train all of our participants on using PRISM. And don't forget, these people were not technology or computer literate. What we did when we designed PRISM, we used a user-centered design approach. So we used focus groups. We, I think, had 3 rounds of usability testing at all of our 3 sites. We also tested our training program, which was really, really informative for us in terms of thinking about what's the best way to train people to use this technology. So the way we did it was individually in the participants' home. There was no COVID then. We actually went into their home, helped them set up the system for them, and then trained them over 3 days. They had access to technical help. We gave them an instructional manual, a quick start guide. So they had a lot of support. We got changes in our outcomes in the expected direction. You saw that graph earlier with the computer proficiency, but also people after using PRISM felt much more comfortable with computers, and also they felt better about their ability to use computers and other types of technology. People used PRISM throughout the 12 months, on average about 4 days a week, and the things they use the most, not surprising, were email, the internet, and games. The game they liked the most was solitaire. And we were trying to foster collaboration, but they like playing solitaire. Anyways, where we are now, we developed PRISM 2.0. And again, we're evaluating the efficacy of this in terms of reducing isolation and enhancing social connectivity. Here with in PRISM 1, our sample was community dwelling older adults. Here we're looking at older adults in different contexts. FSU is focusing on rural locations, University of Illinois, senior housing. At Miami, we did it with assisted living facilities, and we got a supplement for the NIA to test a simplified version of PRISM with people with MCI. And so you can see the screen looks different, and we had a few more bells and whistles. It was on a tablet as opposed to a PC, and I'm not sure. I think, surprisingly, I think a PC is maybe better for this population because it's more present, doesn't have to be charged, can't be put in a drawer and forgot about, but we're still thinking about that. We have finished recruitment and enrollment and data collection. We're now in the process of data cleaning. That's where we are with this trial. It did get interrupted by COVID, so we had to, like all of you, I'm sure, change our protocols a little, which caused some delays in the trial. Here's some of the screens in PRISM, the games. We changed the games, so now there were single as well as multiplayer games. We had other features for people to socialize. We just developed a health feature where people could learn about health resources. We had a health glossary. Again, we had a community feature, and that's what our email system looked like. So in terms of physical and social well-being, we just recently finished a study called FIDDLE. FIDDLE was an NIH-R01, a randomized controlled trial. I did this with my colleague Joe Sherrod and Pete Paroli. Here we were looking at the usability and efficacy of a digital tablet-based system. And the FIDDLE provided personalized programs for enhancing physical activity, but also social connectivity and support. This is what the homepage of FIDDLE looks like. I'll go over that in a minute. Our target population was sedentary older adults, and we had some criteria for defining that. If the program was tailored to the individual's fitness level. We started this before COVID, so when people came in for the baseline assessment, we had an algorithm, even though they were all sedentary. for determining if they were at the low, a medium, or high level of functioning. The exercise program they got then was tailored to that level of functioning. And then within their level, they could choose to do exercises at an easy, moderate, or a harder level. When people became part of teams, so we had 4 or 5 people in a team. They gave themselves a name. They received motivational tips every day. They could communicate with their team. They were trained with their team, and the whole program was administered at home virtually. So this is what the home screen looks like, and I'll walk you through some of those features in a minute. They got a tip of the day. Also, they would tap the center. They were given exercises, weekly exercises, cardio, strength, balance. They were designed by an exercise physiologist who works with seniors. And then they were queried each day on whether they exercised or not. If they said no, we asked them why they weren't exercising. And they also had a misfit. We gave them a misfit so we could measure the steps, as well as an exercise band. So this is the app. You saw the homepage already. This is how the exercises were presented. They were static pictures, and then there were instructions. People could chart their progress. Their exercises, the previous exercises went into a library, so they could do them. If they had a favorite, they could do that exercise. They could chat with their team, or they could chat with an individual person who was in their team. So we randomized 182 trials. This was multi-site because we started this when I was in Miami. So we actually recruited people from both Miami and New York. And we're just now going through all the data. Again, we measured we had real-time measures of fiddle use. People really liked the app. They found it to be highly usable. The mean usability rating on this scale, I forgot what the name of the scale was, 47. The maximum you could get was 50. We found that use of fiddle was correlated with an increased step count. People who use fiddle more tended to step more. It was correlated with gains on the IPEQ, which is an exercise assessment questionnaire. And then we're doing some exploratory work, dividing our participants into older and younger. And we found actually with the older participants, so over the age of 69, that increased usage was associated with decreases in social isolation and loneliness, and also increases in exercise self-efficacy. And surprising to me, attrition for the trial was really low. It was only 14%. This was even during COVID. People liked participating in this program. In fact, we had a wait list for recruitment, which is, a bit unusual when you're doing these kind of trials. So now I'll just turn in the last few minutes to Create. As I said, we've just been in June, got our NOGA, Create 4, Create 5. So Create's been funded since 1999. It's expanded greatly. It used to just be Miami, FSU, and Georgia Tech. And now Cornell, it involves Weill Cornell Medicine, Cornell Tech, as well as Cornell University, which is in Ithaca. Cornell Medicine is in Manhattan in the city, and Cornell Tech is across the East River on Roosevelt Island. So, and what we're interested in, of course, is issues surrounding older adults and their interaction with technology. Here's our team at Weill Cornell, as well as at the University of Miami. Joe Sherrod is one of the founding members of Create. He's still involved. We also have Rachel Ostrand involved from IBM. She's going to do some very neat stuff in one of our projects with speech analysis. And we have, programmers, behavioral scientists, and also we have, if you'll notice, someone from cybersecurity. which was it's a big issue now, as you're well aware when you're doing work with this in the technology space. These are the teams at the University of Illinois. We have someone from Northwestern and at Florida State University. So CREATE has grown a great deal. We started out with 5 key players, and now we've expanded exponentially. Here's our structure. And we have an administrative core which sits at Weill Cornell. The executive working group is the original 5 people from CREATE. We have several boards, an external scientific advisory board. We also have an industry advisory council. The reason is because we're developing technology products and systems. We have a dissemination core, a data and technical development core, as well as a pilot research program. And then we have 3 main research projects, which are like R01s. And of course, we have a community advisory boards at each site, as well as a data safety and monitoring board. So it is a very complex structure, but it works well. Our goals is really to look at how person characteristics influence person-technology interactions, and we look at a broad range of technologies across very broad and diverse populations. And that's one of the benefits of having our multi-site center is we have access to very diverse older adults. We really are applied, so we want to look at design solutions to promote successful technology adoption among older people, ensure that all the benefits of technology can be realized by older adults. We are now looking at bigger questions, how interactions with technology impact quality of life and well-being. And we're looking at principles and protocols. We have a book series. We just in 2019 or 18 published in 19, the 3rd edition of our design guidelines. Last year, we came out with a case study compendium book for the design guidelines. Our pilot research program has been very successful. We've also trained many, many students over the years. And we also want to foster collaborations with you guys, with people like you guys who are working in the aging and technology domain. Oops, sorry. So these are our 3 research projects. We're just getting them kicked off. As I said, we're starting to work in virtual reality. So we're looking at developing a virtual reality program to support cognitive health and engagement, as well as socialization among aging adults. Project 2 is developing a technology support system. Our target population here is aging adults with mild cognitive impairment. This is a new space for CREATE. And then the 3rd project is really developing digital assistants to provide support for health management activities. And that's our populations here are aging adults, both with and without cognitive impairment. So we had our first big CREATE 5 meeting a few weeks ago. Actually, right after this meeting, we're having a meeting of our data core. So stay tuned. You'll hear more about these projects as they evolve. And then I just wanted to talk about Enhance. This is another center within our center. It's funded by NIDLR. Wally Boot and I direct this, and Enhance is really looking at understanding challenges that older adults with cognitive impairments encounter with living activities. What are their needed areas and preferences for support? We want to develop and evaluate potential technology solutions to meet these challenges. We have a dissemination component, and we also want to advance new knowledge in the aging, cognitive disability, and technology space. Here's our target populations. We're looking at older adults with a cognitive impairment due to MCI, stroke, or traumatic brain injury. The way this is a NIDLR funded project, it's RERC, so they're structured a little differently than an NIH funded center. There are two larger scale research projects, two developmental projects, which are much smaller in scale. A real focus here is on product development. We had to actually take some training in tech transfer as part of the grant. And then we have training and dissemination activities, which are also required. So in conclusion, some important issues I think we need to think about if we're doing work in aging and technology, and I think they fall into three buckets. We certainly have to think about policy implications, what ensuring meaningful access to these systems, especially for at-risk populations. Lots of issues around cost, reimbursement, cyber security. In the research space, I think there's a ton of work to be done. I think we need a lot more robust studies of effectiveness with diverse populations. There's issues around measurement and big data. And beyond just doing efficacy trials, I think we have to think about strategies both for implementing, right? If we're going to build these systems, how do we get them out there in the world and how do we sustain them? And then, of course, I think there are lots of issues for system designers around the design process, using a user-centered design approach, integration across technology platforms. I think this is a huge issue, especially within the healthcare arena. And then how can we push the technology platform to make it more engaging and to help with this issue of sustainability? So thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing.
Great. That was excellent. Thank you, Sara, for that. So I'm going to take the liberty of just sort of starting us off, and then we'll look to my colleagues who have joined us on Zoom to kind of begin the conversation. So there's a lot of us, and everything you said, you're totally right. I was preaching to the choir. We are kindred spirits, I think, in how we're orienting our own center. So I want to sort of start off with what I found particularly interesting about the work that you presented is, to some extent, you are at the interface between using technology as a mediator of intervention. So think on one hand of,
Right.
Zoom as a way for me to give cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever it is. And on the other hand, technology as the intervention. So a digital social robot of some sort, for example, and that's the intervention. And it seems like your direction of work is about access, as in almost technology becomes the intervention. But if I have access to the internet, if I can use a calendar, if I have email, I can improve skills, reduce social isolation just by improving access. And yes, there is other things in there, physical therapy training, other things there as well, but access is the nugget of it, which seems to be in the middle of these two extremes. Would you agree with that characterization, or how else should we be thinking about how you sort of frame the space of your research?
Well, I think you're right. We look at developing systems and programs, and also I think use technology as a vehicle to get programs and services to people. But I think access is really a huge part of what we do. We all have some background in, the main team of CREATE and others in human factors engineering. So when we think about technology, access is forefront for us. I mean, we can develop all kinds of systems and bells and whistles, but if people can't access them or use them, or they don't find them valuable, they're certainly not going to continue to use them or be able to use them. So I think, we've spent a lot. We just had a paper accepted, in fact, on factors influencing tech adoption, what drives older adults to adopt technology. And the two big things that we found was, one was perceived value, and the other is how is it going to contribute to quality of life.
Great. So maybe just Deepak, please.
Sure. Thank you, Sara. That was a very enlightening, very interesting talk. So I'm curious, in your work, as you think about technology acceptability and adoption and various other issues, how does it change over the course of, let's say cognitive impairment? Like what I imagine that the technologies that are acceptable and suitable for people in an MCI stage will be very different from later on and very different from earlier. So how does that, like when you think from a human factors perspective, how does that impact what you design?
Well, I think that I can think about that from two perspectives. One is having technology that's adaptable. So for example, in some of our creative applications now, we're going to embed some AI and machine learning. So that become, especially in project 2, so it is adaptable for different, cognition fluctuates over time, right? Even for those with MCI. So in some respects, we'd like to, as far as possible, the technology to adapt to the system. But the other way I think we try and address that issue is by doing user testing with very, very diverse populations. So the PRISM system for our MCI population was didn't have as many bells and whistles for the people who didn't have MCI, because we found that when we first started to train people, we pilot tested it. It was overwhelming. So we streamlined the system and just kept features on there that people would use them, have the most use or prefer the most. And we also tailored our training. Okay, people needed more training, they needed more support. So we adapted not only our protocols, but also the technology.
And just generally, like, what's your sense of the acceptability of technology emerges every day, right? And things are changing so rapidly, it's impossible to keep up. So VR, you mentioned, but just, certainly the wearable device market is huge these days. So what's your sense of, and of course, what they do and what they infer has also changed. Devices inferring stress and various other things. So what's your experience on how older adults view some of these? Is it?
I think it's problematic. I really do. I think it's problematic from a couple of perspectives. One is cost, right? I heard, the iPhone 14 or whatever it is, it's like $800. That's not insignificant. These smartphones are really expensive, and besides cost, it's understanding, should I upgrade my system? How do I handle this software change? That's very complicated. And people get into all kinds of trouble because they don't know if they should do the upgrade or not do the upgrade. They don't know how to do it. And then the system changes. So their skills are no longer, they need newer skills. They have to continually relearn. And I also think that people don't want to invest a lot of time doing that. I certainly don't, but I think that's true of a lot of people. I don't find it that much fun.
Great. So again, I'll invite others to ask questions, maybe just raise your hands, but I'm going to continue us on. Margie, I'll come to you. I'm going to ask a question about reimbursement. And Sara, I think you could easily make the case that the sorts of technology you've been developing and are advocating, may well have a financial offset, at least for payers. And I'm just curious if you could just comment on, like, have you had conversations around this, or any thoughts you have about making the business case that these should be reimbursable services?
Well, we are working with the tech transfer group at Weill Cornell now for PRISM. And actually, I'm very pleased to say that Hans Werner Wall is implementing PRISM in Germany in a trial. So we've actually reached an agreement with Heidelberg because they're going to be deploying PRISM. And we have had lots of requests for that software. It's not easy. IP issues in these kinds of systems are not easy because some of our applications fed off of Google. So who owns the IP? Now there's 4 universities involved. So you know what that means. There's 4 lawyers and legal teams involved. But it's we certainly are thinking about that. And in our NIDLR Enhance Center, they really expect that at the end of the 5 years, you're going to come out with some products and that are going to be marketable.
Mhm.
Now, you know, I think a thing to think about there is sustainability. I mean, we're university researchers. We don't have people to maintain software for hundreds of users, so I think there has to be a very unique business model in order to do that.
Great. Margie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. That was great. I followed your work for many years, but to see it all together and the evolution was just wonderful and really exciting programs of research. So you mentioned at the beginning that one of your goals is to enhance independence and quality of life. And in many ways, that's somewhat, it intersects, it's consistent with what our center is interested in. We've specified it mainly in terms of helping people to age in place. As you mentioned, that's what most people desire, to age in place. But when we get our proposals from people, they may have some really cool technology, some really interesting things, but the missing link often is how they can apply that technology to help people age in place.
Right.
So I wondered if you had any insights from maybe any examples from your work that we could potentially use to sort of help people to go from this cool thing they've developed to how that actually helps them to maintain independence and age in place. So I thought maybe you had a few examples that we could potentially use.
Well, I think Fiddle is a good example of that, because Fiddle is an exercise program that's digital and virtual. But we looked at it in a couple of ways. One, that it would get people moving, which it seems to have done. I mean, we haven't done a deep dive into the data yet, but also to get them out and engage with others that are exercising. Or, you know, one of our community agencies in New York said, well, you know, we'd like to implement it because maybe if they get kickstarted with your program, they'll engage more with our programs that are being offered at our center. So I think integrating it within, like, almost like a pragmatic trial, but beyond the trial, is a really good way to do it. And it's the same thing with PRISM. The same agency asked if we could develop a PRISM-like system for them because they have a lot of clients who are not mobile. And they have many cultural programs and lectures, and so it could be a vehicle to bring things to people who can't access them otherwise. So I think, and we know that, you know, social isolation, lack of engagement is very detrimental to health. So I think that, you know, those are some examples of how we can do that.
Yeah. Do you find older, I know I was very impressed with your prison sample, how diverse it was, and the usability seemed quite good. Do you find, I mean, my sense is there's a lot of older people who are very resistant to using technology. And I know you just did the study to try to predict who might use it, but are the people that you're getting in your studies like just already converted? They're interested in using technology. How do you get the people who don't use technology or they're kind of afraid of technology? Do you have techniques for getting those people into your research?
We do a couple of things. Adrian, the assistant director, is very clever with her advertising. I can take no credit for that at all. But also, I think two big hurdles to get over there. One is you have to show people how it's valuable to them. So, for example, when we were introducing people to PRISM, you know, we showed them, well, what are your hobbies? Or what are your interests? And here's how you can use the system to align with those interests. And the other is really how they're trained and how you're implementing it. I mean, it's when we did the PRISM, when we piloted the training, we did, at all 3 sites, we found that people could learn the PRISM system because it was easy to use. What they couldn't do was use a mouse and understand mouse and window functions. So we had to revamp our training to give them more training on the very basics and the basic skills before we could train them on the actual use of the PRISM system. Had we not piloted that, they wouldn't have used the technology at all. So it was getting over and instilling confidence in them that they weren't going to break it.
Thank you.
Great. Maybe I'll take one last question and then we'll let you get off to your
Create data call.
Exactly. So I'm curious, just building on Margie's line of questioning, you've made reference to this, but access in some communities, especially low broadband based communities, is a major problem.
Yes.
I'm wondering if in the design process, how you grapple with that. Is that something you consider, or is that something that we just hope that with better broadband access, things will get better over time?
No, we consider it when we do our research. Like Neil and Raleigh had a lot of trouble with the rural locations. So we put, I'm not a technology expert, but we put a MiFi on the computer to actually give them better access. So when we do this research, we give people the technology, and we also give them internet access. So we do think about that. A while ago, when we were doing some caregiver research, and the tech required internet, and we were in poor neighborhoods in Miami, and people did not have it, so we had to actually pay off phone bills for the phone company to go in and install it. So it really is something to think about.
Yep, perfect. Well, thank you so very much. That was lovely to learn about your amazingly inspiring work, well aligned with a lot of the things we're thinking about. And we thank everyone else for joining us today, and we hope you have a great evening. Thanks so much.